Okay, so I know you are super busy. You've had a lot on your plate. It was probably difficult to sneak away and be here tonight, but I want you to know you guys are in the right place at the right time. If you have your cell phone on you, put it on silent. If you want to make it really fun, put it on vibrate and just keep it in your lap and see if anyone calls you. Okay, see, one person laughed. Okay, but you're in the right place because tonight I'm going to teach you, see, I'm working two things here. An easy three-step system to protecting your hard-earned money for yourself and your loved ones from pesky government interference, creditors, financial predators, and greedy family members. Nobody has a greedy family member, right? No, right? There's always one in every family. Okay, so just like you, Anna Lee and I, yes, we're women, you know, it's not often we have men here, but we're happy that you guys are here. But like you, we are busy women. We work hard every day to build quality lives for our families, and we spend a lot of time investing in our careers and our loved ones, and we want to make sure that it counts for something. So even if you don't feel like you're in the place financially where you want to be, I would bet everything I have that what you do have, you have worked hard for, and you want to make sure that you keep it and it doesn't get wasted and squandered by somebody else down the road. Am I right? Okay. All right, moving on. I got to do this and that. Okay. Housekeeping. Yes, we're trying to record tonight. I don't know if it's working or not. We are not broadcasting live to Facebook, so you don't have to worry about that. But none of you are on camera anyway, so don't worry about that. Talked about the phones. We're going to move fast. We will have a break. Anna-Lee said restrooms are down the hall, but you can do that when I'm done. And okay, let's go. Moving on. Okay, we heard about them. Oh, good. This is great. I'm just moving right through. Okay, so moving on right now in 3 easy steps. This is what we're going to learn tonight. Boom. Okay. Why is this important? I've been working with families like yours for over 20 years now, so I have lots of stories of planning that's gone right and planning that's gone very wrong. So let me share with you a quick story from my own personal family. So my grandfather remarried late in life, and when he passed away, he had a plan in place that left, well, let me back up. My grandfather had 3 kids. His new wife had 1 child, I believe it is. Okay, so they got married. My grandfather passed away, and he left all of his substantial holdings that he had. He was a very successful business owner, had been married to my grandmother for 40 years. And left it all in trust for the benefit of his wife. And then upon her death, it was to be split among the 4 kids, the collective kids, right? Sounds fair, right? Who do you think the trustee was of the trust? Actually, it was the wife, okay? And the trust said, hey, wife can use the money however she wants during her lifetime, and whatever happens to be left is going to get split 4 ways. So it was a little hairy there. It ended up all working out that everybody just kind of went their own separate ways, but it was very difficult at the time. There were a lot of emotions running high and a lot of legal fees involved. So I was not involved with the planning, obviously, but I don't think his attorney really advised him on how that plan was really going to play out, right? When you're married, you're like, oh, everybody gets along, but see, everyone didn't all get along, so he should have known that. But let's say everyone gets along, they're all going to work it out, but it doesn't always work out that way. So if that's the plan that you want and you know that there may be problems down the road, that's certainly your prerogative. But if someone had told you, you know what, let's play this out, let's talk some worst case scenarios. I think there are some other ways that we could structure it so that you can still provide for everyone that's important in your life and nobody gets cut out in the process and there won't be a bunch of family fighting down the road. So that's from my own personal experience. So I'm that has definitely driven home the point how important planning is, and the right planning, especially in blended marriages. I have another girlfriend, some of you have heard this story before. She is my age, and about 10 years ago, her husband, also our age, died unexpectedly. She had 4 kids at the time, under the age of 10. Oh, it was just a nightmare all the way around. She was a stay-at-home mom. Well, apparently, no, she didn't know this at the time until he passed away and she's going through all of his stuff, but the house was just in his name because he purchased the house before they got married. And he didn't have a will, so she wanted to refinance. So back then, the laws were different. If you had kids who were also the kids of your spouse, the kids get a certain amount and then everything else is split 50-50, and Homestead, it has its own little quirks in there as well. But basically, she could not afford to keep the house with its current mortgage. It was a really high interest rate mortgage. Well, she wanted to refinance it, but because she didn't own the house 100%, she wasn't entitled to the house 100%, she actually had to go to court to pay off her kids' interest in the house. Use some of that life insurance to set it aside for the kids where she can't use it to pay for the house or anything. So that was just another example of just no planning at all with unintended consequences. And of course, you know, he was in his early 40s. Who thinks you need to plan? You don't know. So the best time, what's that old saying about a tree? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. I think the same is true with your planning. The best time was when you became an adult, right? 18, 20, whatever. The second best time is right now if you haven't planned yet. Okay, and I am sorry, I'm trying to keep up with 2 different remotes. Okay, so the good thing is that when you have a good, solid plan in place, your family is much less likely to suffer some of these hardships down the road. You can't foresee everything. There may always be that one that just likes to raise a stink about stuff, and so you can't predict everything, but your plan can go a long way to nipping it in the bud. So at our office, we have distilled this process down to an easy 3-step formula that whether you work with us or you go to your own advisor, you can make sure that this plan is followed and all of these points are hit in terms of crafting your plan and putting it into place. Okay, I'll just skip over that. Okay, here we go. Here's the formula. It's an easy 3-step formula. You can remember it by this acronym, GPS. So that's the formula, the GPS formula. The G stands for guarantee. You want to, and this is why everyone comes to me, hey, I want to make sure the people that I want to inherit actually do inherit. So you want to guarantee that your loved ones are actually going to inherit your assets. And there may be people that you don't want to inherit your assets. So that all plays into the G, and we're going to go over that in a minute. The P is protecting your assets during your lifetime and for your intended beneficiaries after you pass away. And then S stands for simplify. To the extent possible, we want to make sure that your plan is as simple and practical as possible, that still carries out your goals about who inherits and how we're going to protect it. There's no reason to implement a lot of fancy planning if it's not necessary for your situation. Okay, so let's start with number 1, guarantee. So you want to guarantee that the people or the charities that you choose actually do inherit. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm married, so everything's just going to go to my spouse. Not necessarily true. Or you may think, well, I have kids by a prior marriage and I'm remarried now, and my husband knows I want everything to go to my kids because I worked hard for that with my first marriage. And he's cool with that. He's not going to make a claim for it. Well, in Florida, surviving spouses have guaranteed inheritance rights, unless they waive it in writing. That's usually done through a pre or a postnuptial agreement. Postnuptial and prenuptial agreements, I know they get a bad rap, but I want to dispel that of you right now. I talk to my clients all the time, especially my widower men. I don't know what it is with do you have this, Annalie? My widower men, they want to remarry. I don't, I'm like, no, you're not remarrying until you talk to me first and we get a prenup in place. So let me tell you a story about this. I had a woman come to see me a while back, elderly woman, had remarried after a long time marriage of about 40 plus years, and her husband died, and they had a successful business together. They had acquired quite a bit of wealth with them, and they had 3 kids. She had 3 kids. Well, she came to see me, and I said, well, why are you here? She goes, oh, well, my husband brought me. I said, oh, your new husband brought you? Yeah, well, okay, well, why did he schedule the appointment for you? Oh, because he wants me to include him in my plan. And he was in the lobby. So number one, he was not happy because she was my client. So that's who I meet with. And you could flip-flop this. I'm not picking on guys. It just so happens it was the woman that came to see me. And I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to keep it just as it is. I want everything to go to my kids because this is what I earned with their dad. I said, okay, well, we don't have to do anything, but let me ask you, do you have a prenuptial agreement? She said, well, I did. I said, well, what do you mean you did? She said, well, my friends told me I could not get married until I had one. So we got one, but then after we got married, he just wore me down. You don't love me, you don't trust me, whatever, and so I ripped it up. So she didn't have a prenup. So now she's back to as if she had none at all. So I basically told her, I said, if you won't sign a new postnuptial agreement, you're really just kind of, you're hanging out there, unless you want to go to the trouble of getting divorced, which of course she didn't want to do. Anyway, it turned out, I heard through the grapevine that it all worked out okay, but I know that it was a little scary for her to hear that. But our job as advisors is not to tell you what you want to hear. Our job is to tell you the way it is, right? And to also just give you worst case scenarios in case there's some planning that we can put into place to prevent it. Okay, titling of assets. So guaranteeing that the people that you want to inherit actually do. The titling of your assets and your beneficiary designations, super important. A lot of people mistakenly think, I have a will, and my will says everything's going to my kids. But you co-own property with somebody, or you have one person named as beneficiary. Beneficiary forms and the titling of your assets always trump your will. Always. So our job as advisors is to look at the big picture and find out, how do you own each account and each piece of property? Who are the beneficiaries, both primary and the backup or contingent, on all of these accounts? Okay? What do we want to see happen? And how are we going to make that happen? Through a combination of ownership, beneficiaries, and any documents. So think of your estate planning as a puzzle. So our job as advisors is to make sure all of the pieces of your puzzles are put together in such a way that the people that you want to inherit actually do inherit, as opposed to just going to Office Depot and buying the will and saying, oh, everything's going to go to my kids. That may not be the case. It's just, a document is always just one piece of your planning puzzle. Okay, we're going to get to that disabled beneficiaries in a second. Okay, step 2 is protect. So now we know who we want to leave your assets to. Now we need to have the discussion of, okay, do we need to protect that inheritance in any way? And you might be thinking, well, from who? Well, maybe those beneficiaries are young. They're minors. Well, they can't manage any assets. They're under 18. So that's not going to work. Maybe they have creditor problems, and you don't want to leave an inheritance to a child who has creditor problems or is filing bankruptcy or maybe going through a divorce soon. How about Uncle Sam? If your estate is large enough, we might have to address some issues with federal estate taxes, although that's very high now, $5.5 million a person, but sometimes, right, it applies. It doesn't apply to me yet, okay, but it does apply to some families. You may have family members that you know are going to create a problem. So we want to address that. And you also just might want to protect the beneficiaries from themselves. They may have addiction problems or be making poor financial choices. They just aren't good money managers. And you know if you leave them something, it's going to be gone like that. So the way we most often protect inheritances is through a combination of different types of trusts. So all a trust is leaving something in trust for somebody and usually naming somebody else to manage it. That somebody else might be another family member or trusted friend or a financial institution who acts as a professional trustee. Different types of trusts. There are special trusts that we can use for retirement benefits. I think I read a statistic, Annalee can correct me if I'm wrong, that something like 90% of all retirement accounts are cashed out within 5 years of a person's death. So that means 3 years, within 3 years of a person's death. So let's say you leave $1 million IRA to your kid, and you're thinking, oh, well, I have this $1 million IRA, and I'm just going to take my required minimum distributions and pay the income taxes as I draw it out, right? No, you leave it to your kid, and you're thinking, well, they have that option to draw it out annually. You think they're just going to hold off and wait? Statistically, no. They're going to cash out that $1 million. They're going to take the big hit and pay all the income taxes at once and go buy a house or whatever. So, and that may be okay to you, but we have the discussion. Okay, that's what it is. I'm not telling you you have to set up a trust to protect somebody. We're just going to have the discussion, and you may say, you know what, if they need it, I'm gone. What do I care? If they need it, they need it. Okay, so we're just going to have the conversation. You may have a disabled beneficiary, and we can't just leave them, well, you could leave them an inheritance outright, but then it would jeopardize their public assistance benefits. So there are special types of trusts that you can set up for a disabled beneficiary, still leave them a nice inheritance, and they still get to collect their check and keep their medical benefits as well. Again, trusts for minors. We also have trusts for spouses. So getting back to my grandfather's example, there are spousal trusts, but in that situation, you might want to consider maybe naming an independent trustee who's kind of monitoring how the funds are going to be used if the ultimate beneficiaries are someone who would not be that spouse's heirs. Okay. So lots of different trusts that we can set up here. And then I just have clients too that set up trusts for adult children who are just making poor choices. They're spendthrift, they just can't, they don't never have two nickels to rub together. And you know what, I'm gonna have this other person dole it out to them on a monthly basis. And at least I know they're gonna be taken care of. So I hear that a lot. So with Protect, we're having the conversation. We may implement one or more different types of trusts into your plan. Okay, step 3, simplify. Simplify is making sure that our plan, like I said, is as simple as possible to carry out your goals. If you remember nothing else tonight, this is super, okay, I'll come back to that. Super important. How your assets are going to pass depend on which bucket your assets live in. Okay, this is what I mean by this. If you have assets that are just in your own name alone, no beneficiary, okay, you own a house, it's just in your name, then when you die, it will pass according to state law to your heirs. If you don't have a will, and if you do have a will, it will pass according to your will and go through probate. So this bucket is the probate bucket over here. The second bucket are assets you own with somebody else. There's a right of survivorship. Annalee and I co-own a house together. We own it with rights of survivorship. I die, it's now hers. It doesn't matter if my will said my half goes to my kids. But no probate. It just doesn't pass according to any documents. Bucket 3 are any assets owned by a trust. So some of my clients, we have set up a special type of trust called a living revocable trust. And that does avoid probate of any assets owned by the trust. A lot of people mistakenly think, oh, I have a trust, then nothing's going to go through probate. No, only the assets owned by your trust avoid probate. So if you have a trust, you want to make sure your trust owns your assets. If it does, there would be no probate, and it would pass according to the trust document, the terms of the document when you die. And then bucket 4 are beneficiary controlled assets. Life insurance, annuities, you can have financial accounts, IRAs. Anything where you can name a beneficiary, when you pass away, that's who's going to inherit that account, regardless of what your will or your trust says. So again, when you're working with your advisors, their job is to analyze where all of your assets currently live, which bucket. We now know who's supposed to inherit, and if we want to protect any of that, and then formulate the plan to pull all of the pieces together. Okay, let me back up one slide here about protect. So we talked about protecting your assets for your intended beneficiaries. How about protecting your assets from any creditors you might possibly have in the future? So you may be completely debt-free, but all of us are at risk of getting in a car accident. And we look down one time, and it might even be our fault. And it might even be catastrophic. So, and we may have a major medical event that is huge and a huge financial burden for us. So in Florida, we're pretty fortunate because Florida is what we call a debtor-friendly state. There are a lot of assets that you can have in Florida that are not subject to your creditors. In other words, those creditors can't come after those assets. For example, your home in Florida is protected from your creditors. You can have a $5 million home, your creditors can't touch it. Your retirement accounts, they can't touch that. You could have $10 million sitting in a retirement account. Your creditors can't touch it until it comes out, right? So if you're drawing out required minimum distributions, then that may be at risk. Annuities are not subject to your creditors. Cash value of any life insurance policies are not at risk. Assets you co-own with your spouse, if there's a judgment against one of you, they can't break that co-ownership. Now, if there was a judgment against both of you, then they could break into that asset, unless it's one of these other protected ones. And then assets owned by an LLC or other corporate entities are also, they can't go after you personally. I recommend and have a conversation with clients about looking into an umbrella liability policy. So let's say you get into that car accident, it's catastrophic, your insurance taps out. Let's say you had $300,000 of car insurance, but you have a $1 million judgment against you, damages. Well, the 300 pays. Now they're going to start looking for the other 700,000 somewhere. If you have an umbrella liability policy, that would kick in at that point. And trust me, a plaintiff's attorney is going to go after the easy money, which is an insurance policy. And then, yeah, I guess that was all I was going to say there. Oh, and if you have rental properties, definitely consider putting them into an LLC. Okay, if you remember nothing else tonight, I want you to remember this formula: GPS, a solid succession plan equals peace of mind. That's what my clients tell me. I had a client today pick up her binder with all of her signed documents. She said, this is just a huge weight lifted that I've finally done this because I've been procrastinating for so long, and it was actually a lot easier of a process than I thought it would be. Okay. Okay, can you do this yourself? Maybe. But again, the problem is that, yeah, you can go to LegalZoom and you can go to Office Depot, buy yourself a form, which, by the way, It's a perfectly good form. I'm sure it is. It probably is. I haven't read them, but I'm sure they're perfectly fine. But the problem is that most of us, if we haven't been to law school or not, or otherwise trained, are not educated to know how to pull all those pieces of the puzzle together and know what federal and state law says you can and can't do with your assets. And that's what we are trained for. So some of you, if you're not my client already, might be thinking, oh, hey, I want to come in and chat with you. And that's great. We love working with new clients. But let me just be upfront. My Pink Lawyer is not for everybody. We are not the cheapest kids in town. I'm upfront about that. We're just not. We do require you to fill out a worksheet before you come in. So yes, there will be a little bit of homework along the way. It's nothing onerous, but we do want you to do that because I review every single worksheet before I meet with somebody. I am prepared, just like Anna Lee is, before I meet with anybody. I've started taking my notes and I've started thinking through what maybe some of the possible issues are that I want to bring up with a client, as opposed to just waltzing in and say, okay, why are you here, Nancy, today? What can we do for you? We don't sell a la carte documents, so don't call up and say, hey, I just need a living will for, that's all I need, everything else is done. Well, no, what we do is comprehensive planning to make sure you're protected and your family is protected. And our clients, just like Anna Lee's clients, expect exceptional service. And if you call either of our offices, you'll see our staff is like the best out there. People love calling and talking to them. They don't even want to talk to us half the time, right?